Picture this: a bustling crowd surrounding the iconic royal guard, his stoic presence unshaken by the world around him. But then, a tourist, full of arrogance and disdain, pushes through the onlookers, her eyes fixed on the guard. In a moment of reckless audacity, she slaps him, testing his patience. What happens next will leave you breathless. The guard's response is swift, powerful, and utterly unexpected. Instant karma at its finest. You won't believe the turn this story takes. Keep watching to see how one rash decision leads to a shocking, unforgettable outcome. Also, comment down below and tell us where you're watching this story from. The morning in London had a steady rhythm, like a familiar tune played on repeat. Cars hummed along the streets, pedestrians hurried to work with coffee cups in hand, and red double-decker buses lumbered through traffic like gentle giants. Buckingham Palace, however, stood timeless and untouched by the rush. Behind its gates, the palace grounds stretched wide and proud, flanked by perfectly trimmed hedges and paved walkways. Tourists arrived early, some bundled in coats to guard against the chill, others snapping pictures while juggling maps and guidebooks. They gathered near the gates, eager for the day's ceremony. In the middle of it all stood Sergeant Marcus Daniels, a member of the Queen's Guard. He was one of the many soldiers who donned the iconic red tunic and bearskin hat. But to Marcus, this uniform wasn't just for show. It represented years of service, discipline, and sacrifice. It was more than tradition. It was his duty. Standing at his post, Marcus felt the familiar heaviness of the bearskin hat on his head. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was part of him now, like armor. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, and his tunic was immaculate. To anyone looking at him, he was a picture of calm and control. But beneath his stoic exterior, Marcus was always alert. His eyes scanned the crowd without moving his head, noting the faces of tourists pressed against the gates, their expressions a mix of awe and curiosity. He had grown used to the whispers and the cameras pointed at him. People wanted their photo with the unflinching guards, wanted to see if they could make them break. "Look at him! He's like a statue," someone said, laughing. Marcus heard it but didn't react. He had learned to let the comments roll off him. But some days, the lines between harmless curiosity and disrespect blurred. Today, though, seemed like any other. Until she arrived. Vivian Prescott strode down the sidewalk as if the city were hers. She always walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement in a way that made people glance her way. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, and her coat, a pale beige that screamed money, clung to her shoulders. She didn't bother hiding her irritation at the bustling crowd ahead of her. "Move," she muttered under her breath as she edged through a cluster of tourists, her Louis Vuitton bag slung over her arm like a trophy. Trailing behind her was Claire, her assistant. Claire was used to this routine, Vivian charging ahead, expecting everyone else to follow. She carried a tote bag stuffed with travel brochures, an itinerary, and a water bottle, her sneakers quiet compared to Vivian's sharp heels. Vivian stopped abruptly, her eyes narrowing as she looked up at the tall gates of Buckingham Palace. "So this is it," she said flatly, one hand on her hip. "It's one of London's biggest attractions," Claire said, adjusting her glasses. "We're just in time for the changing of the guard. It's one of the most popular ceremonies in the world." Vivian rolled her eyes. "Popular? Really? It's a bunch of grown men playing dress-up. What's so special about that?" Claire bit her lip, resisting the urge to correct her boss. "It's not just about the ceremony," she explained carefully. "It's about tradition. The guards are highly trained soldiers. It's an honor to be chosen for this role." "Tradition," Vivian repeated, her tone mocking. She glanced at the crowd gathering near the gates, a mix of families, tourists, and history buffs. "I don't get it. What's the point of standing around like a mannequin all day? Do they even do anything?" "Vivian, maybe we should find a spot over there," Claire said, nodding toward the crowd. But Vivian wasn't interested in blending in. She spotted the line of guards standing near the palace doors, their uniforms bright against the gray stone of the building. Her lips curled into a sly smile. "Let's go closer," she said. weaving her way through the tourists before Claire could stop her. The line of guards stood perfectly still, their scarlet tunics glowing in the soft morning light. To the untrained eye, they seemed no different from mannequins in a shop window, but Marcus Daniels knew better. Behind the stoic exteriors, every guard was trained to act decisively if the situation demanded it. Their job was to protect Buckingham Palace and all who resided within it, not just to stand still for tourists' amusement. But tourists rarely understood this. Marcus's eyes remained fixed ahead as the woman edged closer to the rope barrier. He didn't need to move to sense her intentions. He had seen her type before, the kind who treated every space like it existed for their entertainment, every person like they were beneath her notice. Her voice carried over the hum of the crowd. "Do you think they ever get bored?" she asked loudly, turning to the young woman trailing behind her. "Just standing there all day like dolls on display?" The assistant, Marcus noted her plain clothes and anxious posture, whispered something to her, clearly urging her to stop. But the woman waved her off, her arrogance almost palpable. Marcus tightened his grip on his rifle, his fingers brushing the polished wood. He didn't need to look at her to know she was staring directly at him. "This one's different," the woman said, her voice even louder now. She took a step closer, ignoring the rope barrier that separated the crowd from the guards. "Look at him. Doesn't he seem out of place?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. He had heard that phrase too many times before, in whispers from strangers, in muttered conversations when people thought he couldn't hear. Out of place. It was the kind of comment that told you everything you needed to know about the person saying it. Marcus stood taller, letting the remark roll off him like water off stone. The woman smirked, clearly amused by her own words. She leaned toward her assistant as if sharing a private joke, but her voice was loud enough for everyone around her to hear. "I mean, come on. He doesn't exactly fit the picture, does he?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. People began to notice the woman's behavior, their curiosity turning to discomfort. Some shook their heads, whispering to each other. "What's her problem?" a man muttered, his phone raised to record the scene. "She's going too far," another woman said, her tone disapproving. Marcus remained perfectly still, but his mind was a storm. He thought about his training, about the countless times he'd been taught to endure taunts and provocations without reacting. His job was to protect the monarchy, to represent discipline and strength. But there were limits. Vivian Prescott had never been one to stop when she was told to. She thrived on attention, on being the center of every room she entered. And right now, she was at the center of Buckingham Palace's courtyard. The crowd was watching her, cameras out, and she loved it. "Let's see what happens if we test the waters," she said with a sly grin. Her assistant's face turned pale. "Vivian, don't," Claire said, her voice trembling. "You're going to get us in trouble." Vivian rolled her eyes. "What are they going to do? Arrest me for talking to a guard?" She turned back to Marcus, who remained as still as ever, his gaze fixed ahead. "Oh, come on," she said, stepping even closer. "What's the point of all this if you don't even react? Aren't you tired of pretending to be a statue all day?" Marcus felt her presence now, the heat of her words brushing against his face. But he didn't flinch. Vivian tilted her head, inspecting him as if he were an object in a museum. "I wonder what it would take to get a reaction out of you," she mused aloud. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "That's enough, lady," someone called out. "Leave him alone!" shouted another. Vivian ignored them. She reached out a hand, her manicured fingers hovering inches from Marcus's chest. "What about this?" she said, poking him lightly. "Does this bother you?" Marcus's grip on his rifle tightened, but he didn't move. Claire's voice was frantic now. "Vivian, stop! People are recording this!" "Let them record," Vivian said, laughing. "It's not every day you get to see a guard lose his cool." The tension in the air was thick now, the crowd holding its breath as Vivian crossed the barrier, standing directly in front of Marcus. She raised her hand, her smirk widening. What happens if I do this? The slap came out of nowhere, sharp and quick. Her hand connected with Marcus's cheek, the sound echoing across the courtyard. The crowd gasped. Marcus didn't move. Time seemed to freeze. The tourists were silent, their cameras capturing every second of the scene. Vivian stood frozen, her hand still raised, as if she couldn't quite believe what she had done. Then Marcus moved. It wasn't much, a small shift, a step forward, but it was enough to make Vivian take a step back, her smirk faltering. Marcus lowered his rifle slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. "You've gone too far." Vivian blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" "You assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard," Marcus said. "That's a serious offense." Vivian's confidence crumbled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The crowd began to murmur again, louder this time. "She slapped him," someone said. "Did you see that?" "She's lucky he didn't do worse," another added. Marcus straightened his posture, his gaze never leaving Vivian's. "Consider yourself lucky," he said. And then, in one swift motion, he raised his hand. The slap he delivered was firm and measured, not a strike of anger, but a correction. The sound of it echoed across the courtyard, silencing the crowd once again. Vivian stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek. Her face burned red with shock and humiliation. You can't do that," she stammered. "You assaulted me first," Marcus said calmly. Vivian Prescott stared at Marcus, her hand still pressed to her stinging cheek. For the first time in years, she was speechless. Her world had always bent to her will. Waiters scrambled to correct wrong orders, airline staff bumped others to give her better seats, and people catered to her demands without question. But this was something she hadn't prepared for. "You," she began, her voice shaking. "You just hit me." Marcus stood firm, his rifle now back in position, his dark eyes calm but unrelenting. "I responded to your assault," he said, his tone as steady as his posture. "I suggest you step back." The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps. Phones were everywhere, recording every angle of the confrontation. A teenage boy in a hoodie leaned closer to his friend, grinning as he whispered, "Dude, this is going viral." Vivian turned to the crowd, her face burning as she realized they weren't on her side. People were staring at her, shaking their heads, some even laughing. She caught snippets of their words. She deserved that. What was she thinking? And her chest tightened with panic. "I'll have your job for this," Vivian spat, her voice rising in pitch. She jabbed a finger at Marcus, her composure unraveling. "You hear me? I'll have you fired. You'll be begging for scraps when I'm done with you." Marcus didn't respond. He returned to his rigid stance, his gaze fixed ahead as though she no longer existed. "Unbelievable," Vivian muttered, backing away. Her hand trembled as she fumbled for her phone. Claire grabbed her arm, her voice low and urgent. "Vivian, let's go," Claire said. "You're making it worse." "No!" Vivian snapped, pulling free. "I'm calling someone. They'll regret this." Meanwhile, the energy in the crowd was electric. Some people clapped quietly, while others whispered to their companions, debating what had just unfolded. "I can't believe she slapped him first," said an older woman, shaking her head. "What did she expect?" "She thought she could get away with it," replied a man beside her, holding his phone steady as he recorded. "But this guard wasn't having it." Not far away, a group of teenagers huddled around a phone, already uploading clips to social media. "What should we caption it?" one of them asked. "Karma for Karen," another suggested, laughing. As the crowd buzzed with excitement, Claire tugged at Vivian's sleeve again. "Vivian, people are recording this. We have to leave." But Vivian was too caught up in her rage. She jabbed her phone screen, dialing furiously. "I'm calling the police," she declared. Marcus's voice rang out again, calm and authoritative. "You're welcome to do that," he said, not moving an inch. "But keep in mind, There are dozens of witnesses and cameras that captured exactly what happened. Vivian froze, her thumb hovering over the call button. For the first time, doubt flickered across her face. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "He's right," someone said. "I've got the whole thing on video." "She started it," another chimed in. "What's she going to tell the cops? That she slapped a soldier on duty and got slapped back?" Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. Her chest heaved with the effort of holding back a scream. She turned to Claire, who stood frozen, her face pale. "Let's go," Claire said softly, her voice barely audible over the crowd. For once, Vivian didn't argue. She turned sharply on her heel, her head held high as she marched back through the crowd. Claire followed, her steps quick and quiet, like a shadow trailing behind a storm. Marcus stood motionless as the two women disappeared into the crowd. The murmurs around him began to fade as people shifted their attention back to the palace and the upcoming ceremony. But Marcus's mind was far from calm. Though his face remained stoic, a knot of frustration tightened in his chest. He replayed the moment over and over, the way she had poked and taunted him, the sting of her slap, the shocked expression on her face when he had responded in kind. Part of him felt vindicated. She had crossed a line and he had stood his ground. But another part of him, a quieter, more cautious part, worried about the consequences. He thought about his training, about the countless times his superiors had drilled into him the importance of restraint. Guards were meant to represent unshakable discipline, no matter what. And while his actions had been justified, Marcus knew this would not go unnoticed. By the time the changing of the guard ceremony began, the video of the incident was already spreading across the internet. It started with a few uploads to TikTok and Instagram, where users added captions like, "Karen meets her match," and "When you mess with the Queen's Guard." Within hours, the clip had been shared thousands of times. Major news outlets picked up the story, and hashtags like #Guard Justice and #Karma for Karen began trending worldwide. On Twitter, users debated the incident with a mix of humor and outrage. "Finally, a guard who doesn't just stand there," one tweet read, accompanied by a clip of Marcus delivering the slap. "She deserved it. Entitlement has consequences," said another. But not everyone agreed. Some users criticized Marcus for his actions, arguing that he had broken protocol. "A guard's job is to remain composed, no matter what," one post said. "This sets a dangerous precedent." Back at Buckingham Palace, Marcus was unaware of the storm brewing online. But he would soon find out that his life, and Vivian's, was about to change forever. As Marcus finished his shift that day, the courtyard of Buckingham Palace returned to its usual calm. The crowds dispersed, leaving only the soft rustle of the wind and the faint echoes of tourist chatter. But Marcus felt the weight of what had happened linger in the air. In the barracks, Marcus removed his bearskin hat and placed it neatly on the shelf above his bunk. The rhythmic sound of his boots hitting the floor as he unbuckled them seemed louder than usual in the quiet room. He sat down heavily on the edge of his bunk, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The slap, her words, the crowd's reaction, it all churned in his mind. The Queen's Guard didn't break protocol. That was the rule. No matter the taunts, the insults, or the outright provocations, guards were trained to remain stoic. Marcus had prided himself on his ability to hold his ground. But today had been different. He reached for his phone, checking his messages. As he unlocked the screen, dozens of notifications flooded in. Texts, missed calls, emails. He frowned, scrolling through the barrage. "Mate, you're all over the internet," one text read. "You handled that like a boss," said another. A sinking feeling settled in Marcus's chest. He opened one of the links his friend had sent and found himself staring at a video of the incident. His jaw tightened as he watched the slap play out on screen, his own hand rising in response. The crowd's gasp felt even louder on the recording. The comments below the video were relentless. Some praised him, calling him a hero for standing up to entitlement. Others criticized him for reacting, saying he should have followed the guard's code. Marcus turned off his phone and exhaled deeply. This wasn't just a fleeting moment anymore. It was becoming something bigger, something far beyond his control. Meanwhile, Vivian Prescott sat in the back of a black cab, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her cheek still burned, not just from Marcus's slap, but from the humiliation of it all. "Unbelievable," she muttered, glaring out the window as the cab wound its way through London's busy streets. "He hit me. He actually hit me." Claire sat silently beside her, clutching her tote bag like a shield. She had been Vivian's assistant for years, enduring countless tantrums and outbursts, but this was something else entirely. "Vivian," Claire said cautiously, "you did slap him first. Maybe—" "Don't you dare try to blame this on me," Vivian snapped, cutting her off. "I don't care what I did. He had no right to touch me." Claire fell silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. When they arrived at the hotel, Vivian stormed into the lobby, ignoring the curious glances from the staff. By the time she reached her suite, her phone was buzzing nonstop. She tossed it onto the couch, refusing to look at the screen. But curiosity got the better of her. She picked up the phone and opened Instagram. The first thing she saw was a video of herself, frozen mid-slap with the caption, "Karen gets a dose of karma." Her stomach dropped as she scrolled through the comments. She had it coming. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. This is what entitlement looks like. Vivian's hands trembled. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages, most of them harsh and unforgiving. Strangers dissected her life, speculating about her wealth, her upbringing, her privilege. "This isn't happening," she whispered, her voice shaky. Claire walked into the room, her expression wary. "Vivian," she said carefully, "you should probably stay offline for a while. Things are bad." Vivian's eyes flashed with anger. "Bad? He assaulted me, Claire. Why is everyone acting like I'm the villain?" Claire hesitated. "Because you slapped him first, and everyone saw it." Vivian stared at her, speechless. For the first time, the weight of what she had done began to sink in. By the next morning, the incident had become a national story. News channels played the clip on repeat, dissecting every second of the confrontation. Some commentators praised Marcus for his actions, calling him a symbol of strength and dignity. Others questioned whether he had overstepped his role as a guard. "It's about time someone stood up to entitled behavior like this," said a guest on a morning talk show. That woman was completely out of line, and Marcus Daniels showed remarkable restraint. "But restraint is exactly what the guards are supposed to represent," countered another panelist. "This isn't just about one slap. It's about the precedent it sets." The debate spilled over onto social media, where opinions were even more polarized. Marcus became an overnight sensation, with hashtags like #GuardJustice and #StandWithMarcus trending worldwide. Memes of the slap flooded Twitter, many of them poking fun at Vivian. One image showed her shocked expression with the caption, "When you think you're untouchable but reality hits back." Meanwhile, Marcus's name began to surface in news articles, along with details about his military background. Reporters dug into his history, painting him as a disciplined and dedicated soldier who had risen through the ranks. "He's a hero," one article declared, but not everyone saw it that way. At the palace, Marcus's superiors convened a private meeting to discuss the incident. Though they acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances, they couldn't ignore the fact that Marcus had broken protocol. "The integrity of the Queen's Guard must be upheld," said one officer, his tone stern. "This incident reflects on all of us." Another officer, however, took a different view. "With all due respect, sir, Sergeant Daniels was provoked. The tourist assaulted him first. Are we really going to penalize him for defending himself?" The debate raged on behind closed doors, but Marcus was left in the dark. He spent the day performing his duties as usual, though the stares from tourists and the whispers among his fellow guards were impossible to ignore. When his shift ended, he returned to his bunk and found a letter waiting for him. It was marked with the official seal of the palace. Marcus's heart pounded as he opened it. The message was brief but clear. He had been summoned to a private meeting with the palace's press office the following day. Marcus sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the official letter in his hands. The palace's seal was embossed at the top, a stark reminder of the weight of his actions. The words on the page were formal and detached, but their meaning was clear. Tomorrow, he would face a meeting that could determine his future with the Queen's Guard. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on the small desk next to his bed. The barracks around him were quiet, save for the occasional murmur of his fellow guards discussing their plans for the evening. Normally, Marcus would join in, maybe catch a late meal at the mess hall or watch a game on the communal TV. But tonight, he felt no appetite, no interest. He reached for his phone and hesitated. Part of him wanted to ignore the flood of messages and notifications, but curiosity tugged at him. The video of the slap was still trending, with millions of views across multiple platforms. His name was everywhere, and so were the debates. Marcus scrolled through a few comments, his jaw tightening at the divisive tone. Finally, someone who doesn't just take it. Respect to Marcus Daniels. Guards are supposed to represent the monarchy's dignity. This guy blew it. She slapped him first and she deserved it. End of story. With a heavy sigh, Marcus set the phone down and rubbed his temples. He couldn't control what people were saying, but the noise of it all felt overwhelming. The sun was just beginning to rise as Marcus stepped into the palace's administrative wing. The halls were quiet, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. A uniformed staff member led him to a small conference room where 2 officers and a representative from the palace's press office were waiting. "Sergeant Daniels," one of the officers said, gesturing for him to take a seat. Marcus saluted sharply and sat, his back straight and his expression calm. The officer on the left, an older man with graying hair and a stern face, began. "You're here because of the incident that occurred yesterday during your shift. As I'm sure you're aware, this has drawn significant attention, both from the public and the media." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. The other officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, leaned forward. "Sergeant, do you believe your actions were justified?" Marcus took a moment to gather his thoughts. "Yes, ma'am. The individual crossed the barrier, provoked me verbally, and physically assaulted me. I responded with what I believed to be appropriate force to defuse the situation." The officers exchanged glances. "You're aware, of course, that the Queen's Guard is held to a standard of absolute composure," the older officer said. "Breaking that standard, even under provocation, can have consequences." "I understand that, sir," Marcus said. "But I also believe there are limits to what we should be expected to endure." The press representative, a younger man with a tablet in front of him, cleared his throat. "The public is largely on your side," he said. "The video has gone viral, and the overwhelming sentiment is that your actions were justified. However," Marcus waited, his jaw tightening. "However, the monarchy must maintain its image as a symbol of discipline and decorum," the representative continued. "There's concern that this incident could set a precedent." The room fell silent. Marcus knew what they were implying. Finally, the female officer spoke. "Sergeant, no formal disciplinary action will be taken at this time. However, you will be placed on administrative leave pending further review." Marcus felt a wave of relief but kept his expression neutral. "Understood, ma'am." Meanwhile, Vivian Prescott sat in the living room of her London hotel suite, her face pale as she stared at the television. News anchors discussed the incident as clips of the slap played on a loop. Many are calling Marcus Daniels a hero for standing up to entitled behavior. But critics argue that as a member of the Queen's Guard, his actions violated protocol. Vivian muted the TV, her stomach churning. She had spent the morning fielding calls from her lawyer, her PR team, and even her family, all of whom were urging her to stay out of the public eye. But staying out of the spotlight wasn't in Vivian's nature. "They're making me the villain," she muttered, pacing the room. Claire, seated on the couch with her laptop, looked up cautiously. "Maybe it's time to take responsibility," she said quietly. Vivian stopped pacing and glared at her assistant. "Responsibility? For what? For standing up for myself?" Claire hesitated. "You slapped him first, Vivian. People saw it. They're not going to forget that." Vivian's face twisted in frustration. "It's not my fault the internet decided to blow this out of proportion. This should never have been recorded in the first place." Claire sighed, closing her laptop. "You can't control the internet, but you can control how you respond." As the days passed, the story continued to dominate headlines. On one side, Marcus was hailed as a symbol of dignity and self-respect, someone who stood up to entitlement and provocation. On the other, critics argued that his actions had crossed a line, tarnishing the reputation of the Queen's Guard. The debate became a lightning rod for larger conversations about privilege, racism, and authority. Activists pointed to Vivian's comments about Marcus being out of place as an example of the casual racism that often went unchecked in public spaces. "This isn't just about one slap," one commentator said during a televised panel discussion. "This is about a larger issue: who feels entitled to disrespect others and why they think they can get away with it." Vivian, however, refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. She doubled down in interviews, insisting that Marcus's response had been unwarranted and inappropriate. "I was provoked," she claimed during a live segment on a morning show. "Yes, I may have lost my temper, but his reaction was completely unprofessional." The interviewer raised an eyebrow. "But you initiated physical contact, correct? And the video shows—" "I won't apologize for standing up for myself," Vivian interrupted, her voice rising. The backlash was immediate. Viewers flooded the show's social media pages with comments criticizing Vivian's lack of accountability. "She's doubling down instead of admitting she was wrong," one user wrote. "Typical Karen behavior." "She slapped him first and expects sympathy," another added. "Unbelievable." Marcus stood at the edge of his small apartment's balcony, staring out at the bustling city below. The hum of London's evening traffic filled the air, but his mind was elsewhere. He was officially on administrative leave, sidelined from the job he had dedicated himself to for years. His phone sat on the table behind him, buzzing intermittently with new messages and notifications. Marcus ignored it, letting the noise fade into the background. The apartment felt quieter than usual, almost suffocating. The walls were lined with framed photos from his time in the military, reminders of the life he had lived before joining the Queen's Guard. There was a picture of him and his squad in Afghanistan, their faces sunburned but grinning. Another showed him standing in front of Buckingham Palace on his first day as a guard, his uniform crisp and his smile proud. Now, that pride felt dimmed. He turned back toward the table and reluctantly picked up his phone. He opened a message from his older sister, Marcia, who had always been his rock. "Marcia, saw the news, little bro. Proud of you for standing your ground. Call me when you can." Marcus smiled faintly. He knew Marcia's support was unconditional, but he couldn't help feeling the weight of the criticism that had surfaced since the incident. He scrolled through a few more messages. Friend 1. Don't let the haters get to you, man. You did the right thing. Friend 2. Crazy that this is what it takes for people to talk about respect. But then there were the others. Comments from strangers, critics, people who didn't know him but had already formed their opinions. He should be fired. Guards are supposed to be professionals. This guy doesn't deserve to wear that uniform. Marcus set the phone down and rubbed his temples. He knew the world wasn't black and white, but the polarizing reactions to the incident made it hard to focus on what mattered most: his own sense of right and wrong. He decided to call Marcia. The phone rang twice before her warm, familiar voice answered. "Marcus, I was starting to think you were avoiding me," she teased. "Hey, Marcia," Marcus said, his voice quieter than usual. She picked up on it immediately. "You okay?" Marcus sighed. "I don't know. Everyone keeps telling me I did the right thing, but I keep wondering if I could have handled it differently." Marcia's tone softened. Marcus, listen to me. You didn't just stand there and take it. You stood up for yourself. That's not something to feel bad about. But what about the guard's code? Marcus asked. What if I've put the whole team's reputation at risk? Marcia paused. The code's important, sure, but so is respect. You can't let people walk all over you just because of some rule. You're more than just a uniform, Marcus. Her words settled in his chest like a warm ember. While Marcus grappled with his thoughts, Vivian Prescott was fighting a battle of her own, and losing. She sat in her hotel suite, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled tissues. Her laptop was open in front of her, the screen filled with angry messages and news articles dissecting her every move. Her face was plastered across headlines like, Tourist Sparks Controversy After Slapping Royal Guard. Entitled Traveler Faces Backlash Following Palace Incident. Vivian clicked on one of the articles, even though she knew it would only upset her. The piece described her as a symbol of unchecked privilege, detailing the way she had crossed the barrier, taunted Marcus, and escalated the situation. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from her PR agency marked urgent. Vivian opened it reluctantly. Vivian, we strongly advise you to issue a public apology immediately. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to repair your image. Please let us draft a statement for you, said by PR team. Vivian scoffed, slamming the laptop shut. An apology? For what? She muttered aloud. Claire, sitting quietly on the couch, looked up. For slapping him, she offered cautiously. Vivian glared at her. He slapped me back. Why isn't anyone talking about that? Because you slapped him first, Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. And because you said some things that, well, didn't come across very well. Vivian's face reddened. So now I'm the bad guy because I stood up for myself? This is ridiculous. Claire hesitated before speaking again. Vivian, maybe it's time to stop fighting this. An apology could go a long way. Vivian crossed her arms tightly. I'm not apologizing. I did nothing wrong. But deep down, a small voice in her mind whispered that Claire was right. By this time, the internet had become a battleground. On one side, people championed Marcus as a hero, someone who stood up against entitlement and defended his dignity. On the other, critics argued that his reaction had tarnished the reputation of the Queen's Guard. A popular influencer posted a reaction video, breaking down the incident frame by frame. This is the slap heard around the world, the influencer said, pointing to the clip on the screen. And honestly, she had it coming. You can't go around hitting people and expect no consequences. The video gained millions of views, further fueling the debate. Meanwhile, activists began using the incident to highlight larger societal issues. Discussions about race, privilege, and accountability erupted across platforms. This isn't just about one guard and one tourist, one activist tweeted. It's about who feels entitled to cross boundaries and why. The palace press office eventually contacted Marcus with a request. They wanted him to give a public statement. You don't have to do this, the representative assured him during a phone call, but it could help clarify your side of the story. Marcus thought long and hard about the request. Part of him wanted to stay silent and let the video speak for itself, but another part of him, the part that had always believed in the power of words, felt compelled to speak up. The next day, Marcus sat down for an exclusive interview with a respected journalist. The setting was simple, a quiet room with a neutral backdrop, the focus entirely on him. The journalist began with a gentle question. Marcus, how are you feeling after everything that's happened? Marcus took a deep breath. It's been overwhelming, he admitted. I never expected something like this to happen, let alone for it to get so much attention. Do you regret your actions? The journalist asked. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. I regret that the situation escalated the way it did, but I don't regret standing up for myself. Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or what uniform they wear. The interview was broadcast that evening, and Marcus's calm, thoughtful demeanor struck a chord with viewers. Support for him grew even stronger, while Vivian's refusal to apologize only deepened the public's disapproval of her actions. The silence of Vivian's hotel suite was deafening. The once pristine room, with its plush carpets and gleaming surfaces, now felt suffocating, its air heavy with failure. Vivian sat curled on the edge of the sofa, clutching a cup of cold tea she had forgotten to drink. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the bright London skyline. Her laptop was on the coffee table, closed and abandoned after yet another exhausting session of reading articles about herself. For the first time in years, Vivian was alone, truly alone. Her usual allies, friends who loved her brash confidence, acquaintances who admired her wealth, had gone silent. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. Even her lawyer was growing impatient with her refusal to issue an apology. "They're just jealous," Vivian muttered to herself, though the words rang hollow. "They'd all do the same thing if they were in my shoes." She scrolled through her phone, desperate for a distraction, but every swipe brought more evidence of her fall from grace. Sure karma for Karen, still trending, entitled tourist Vivian Prescott doubles down, "I won't apologize." Memes, Vivian's face versus reality, hits back. One particularly harsh comment stopped her cold. "She's not just a Karen, she's the Karen." The longer Vivian stared at the screen, the harder it became to breathe. She tossed the phone onto the coffee table and buried her face in her hands. Claire emerged from the bedroom, her expression cautious. "Vivian," she began softly, "the PR team emailed again. They really think you should say something." Vivian lifted her head, her eyes rimmed with red. "What's the point? They've already decided I'm the villain." "Because you haven't said anything meaningful," Claire pressed. "You keep defending yourself, but you haven't taken responsibility for what happened. People don't want excuses. They want accountability." Vivian glared at her, but the fight had gone out of her. Deep down, she knew Claire was right. But saying sorry, admitting she had been wrong, felt impossible. Apologies meant weakness, and Vivian had built her life around always being in control. Marcus was surprised by how quickly his interview had taken off. Clips of his calm, measured responses circulated online, drawing praise from people around the world. "You're a class act, Marcus," one comment read. "That's how you handle disrespect with dignity." Still, Marcus didn't feel like a hero. The attention made him uncomfortable. Every time he stepped outside, he felt eyes on him, strangers whispering his name. A few even approached him, asking for photos or autographs. "You're famous now, mate," joked one of his colleagues during a rare visit to the barracks. "Yeah," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "Not sure how I feel about it." The truth was, Marcus didn't want fame. He didn't want to be a symbol of resistance or a figure in a global debate about privilege and power. He just wanted to do his job and live his life in peace. But something Marcia had said during their last phone call stuck with him. "You have a platform now, Marcus. You can use it to make a difference." That thought gnawed at him as he sat at his kitchen table one evening, staring at his laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document, daring him to write something. After a long moment, Marcus began to type. "I never expected my actions to spark such a strong reaction. I'm grateful for the support, but I also want to acknowledge that this situation is bigger than me. It's about respect. Respect for boundaries, respect for one another, and respect for ourselves. To those who have reached out with kind words, thank you. To those who disagree with my actions, I hear you. This isn't an easy conversation, but it's one we need to have." The post went live, and within minutes, comments flooded in. Some praised Marcus for his humility, while others continued to debate his choices. But for the first time, Marcus felt like he was contributing to the conversation, rather than just being a symbol of it. As Marcus's post circulated, public opinion began to shift again. Many people admired his grace and thoughtfulness, but others used his words as fuel for further arguments. On talk shows and podcasts, panelists dissected the situation from every angle. Marcus Daniels is showing incredible leadership, said one commentator. He's taking a situation that could have been purely divisive and turning it into a teachable moment. But where's Vivian Prescott's accountability in all this? Countered another. She's been silent, or worse, defiant. That's what people are upset about. The divide became even more pronounced when Vivian finally broke her silence in an exclusive interview. Wearing a muted gray blazer and little makeup, Vivian appeared on a morning talk show. She looked less confident than usual, her usual bravado replaced with nervous energy. "I've been through a lot these past few weeks," she began, her voice quieter than expected. "The backlash has been overwhelming." The interviewer nodded, but didn't let her off the hook. "Do you feel the backlash is unfair, considering the video shows you initiating the physical altercation?" Vivian hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I think the video doesn't tell the whole story," she said carefully. "I was frustrated, and I acted out of emotion. I regret how things escalated, but I also feel that the response has been disproportionate." "Do you regret slapping Sergeant Daniels?" the interviewer asked directly. Vivian's hesitation was palpable. She glanced down at her hands, then back at the interviewer. "Yes," she said finally, the word barely audible. "I do." The admission sent shockwaves through the media. Some saw it as a step toward redemption, while others dismissed it as too little, too late.